Thank you, Vicki. That's beautiful. Ian, you were pretty good too. Okay? And Nancy, always. Thank you. Thank you. This morning, well, let me tell you, first of all, for the next few weeks, we're going to talk about the power of Christmas as we celebrate Advent. I was brought up as a Baptist, so I didn't know what Advent was. For a long time, I really didn't. It wasn't something we celebrated. Well, the Southern Baptists. I don't know about the Northern Baptists. But anyway, it was just something I didn't know about. And as I learned about it, I came to appreciate it when I became a Presbyterian and then a Unitarian and then something else, I don't know, and now at Unity, okay? Which was a progressive movement for me. But anyway, we're going to talk about Advent this year, maybe from a different perspective, to take it into our hearts and our minds so we can really share it and become what Advent really is all about. So the power of Christmas. But today, I just thought we'd take an opportunity for me to answer any questions that you may or may not have. And I am hoping you got a card when you came in and that somebody filled that card out with a question. And so here comes Royce has a question. Anybody else have a card? Here's a card here. Thank you. Right here, Royce. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, that's good. I can only answer two. How do we... Okay, read it for me. You got better eyes than I have, but I can't quite read the handwriting.
All right. How do you reconcile praying and letting go with... How do you reconcile praying and letting go with praying without cleansing?
Praying without...
Ceasing.
Praying without ceasing. Okay, all right. Well, good. Thank you. So how do we reconcile praying, I guess it is? Praying and the understanding of praying without ceasing. Is that basically the question? Royce, is that right? Thank you. Okay, good. Well, I don't just to use my own words, I don't think it takes any reconciliation because it's one and the same. We are always praying. Now, we don't call it prayer. Because sometimes you see we worry a lot. And worry could not be a prayer, but it is. If you spend your time focusing on a given situation, that is a form of praying without ceasing. So if I worry about something, I will bring that into being if I really focus on it. And that's a form of prayer. So I have to be very careful with my thoughts. I have to be very careful with how I want to show up and what I want to show up in my life. And I do that through the power of affirmative prayer. I affirm what I want. Let me give you an example. Charles Fillmore was one of the co-founders of Unity, for those who are guests. And Charles Fillmore, they lived in the late 80s and the early 1900s. And he and Myrtle started the Unity movement. Charles Fillmore was a man who at a young age had a pretty disastrous skating accident. And so what happened is that he actually had a foot that became shorter, or leg that became shorter, because of this accident. As a matter of fact, it was 2.5 inches shorter. And he had all kinds of paraphernalia that he would use, wooden braces and steel braces as he moved along. And the foot did not heal. And so, really well. So, what he did is he watched his wife. And this is a good suggestion. Watch your partner, okay? And see how they do it. And what had happened is his wife, Myrtle, and all her family members had died early in her life with tuberculosis, basically. And so she caught tuberculosis. She was bedridden. They'd pretty much given up on her. And she went to hear a speaker called H.G. Weeks. And what he taught was the idea that you have control. Now listen, this is in the 1800s. 1840s. You have control over the cells in your body. Now, everybody agrees with that today pretty much. But it wasn't until 1990 that science said, oh yeah, the cells in our bodies have intelligence that we direct. She believed that, what he said, and so therefore within 6 months, her tuberculosis had turned around, it was gone, and she said about 2 years later she had no more sickness in her life until she was 89 years old, and she was 40 years old when the tuberculosis took place. So Charles watched that, and he would pray, "Dear God, please fix this bum leg." You know? So what he was doing is affirming that he had a bum leg. And the internal piece of him, that piece which hears and knows who we are and what we are, that's all it heard. You got a bum leg. So guess that's what you want. That's the way the universe works. When he was 70 years old, he started praying, "What a wonderful leg I have. How wonderful that it can recreate itself and have life, and the cells in my body are moving through that leg." And this is scientifically proven, okay? His leg grew 2 1/4 inches from the time he was 70 to the time he was 80. He died at 94 with no limp. So that's the power of affirmative prayer that we're talking about. And so what I want to do is affirm what I want in my life, not complain about what I have in my life when I pray. You understand that difference? See that difference? And so when I pray without ceasing, I got to pray from a positive attitude. So prayer is powerful, it works, but it works when you focus on what you want in your life. It works for you, not against you. Okay? Okay, go ahead and ask that one. Oh, don't do that one. Do this one here because I'm ready for this one. Thank you.
All right. Oh, hey. How does the fifth principle guide me in taking action to make our world one that works for all? For example, work on ban assault and weapons. My gosh, Daphne.
Did you read that again, the
I
last part?
would love to read that again.
Thank you. I got
How
the
does the
first
fifth
part.
principle guide me in taking action to make our world one that works for all? For example, work on banning assault weapons.
Oh, okay, sure. Now I got it. Okay, so there are 5 principles in unities. Most of you know that, some don't. First principle is there's one presence and one power, and that's what we call God, or energy, or the universe, or the divine. And that is good, and it brings good into our lives. The second principle is that Jesus was a way shower that taught us how we could become divine and capture not become divine, but capture our divinity, which is already there. That we are basically created as divine. That there's a law of mind action, and we just talked about that through the power of prayer, but the law of mind action says what I focus on in my life will come into my life. So I really can manage energy. And energy has all kinds of ways it shows up. And I do that through prayer, through affirmative prayer, through what we call denials and affirmations. I deny anything in my life that has any power over me that does not bring out the divine in me. And I affirm who I truly am as a child of God. And then it says, if you believe all those things and agree with those things, then you will take action. You will take action in your life, and as you take action in your life, I believe you are led and guided for a purpose to bring good into the world for others. It's already here. We just have to wake up to it, as do others. And so the idea is to take this action. Now, sometimes the action, it's first of all, just show up as the divinity that you are. Show up in your home as love. Show up in your community as caring. Show up with your children as one who cares about them and sees them as divine. And as we do that, then as we grow personally, we now have an opportunity to grow more into this vision of a world that works for all. If everybody, I'm going to jump here, managed and used guns in the perfect way, with a perfect divine idea, we wouldn't have to worry about guns. But that's not what happens. And so maybe as part of my action, and it's not for Richard as much, but maybe as part of my divine action is that I then become involved in ways to reduce the use of weapons and ways to hopefully change people's hearts so they don't use them in the way they do today. And that becomes a purpose for me. And I step into that and I really look at it, and if I am drawn to that, if I feel like that's the place where I can make a difference in a better world, then I take the action necessary as I see it to do that. Does that make sense? I think that's what it means as action. Most of you know that personally, my whole thought process is that we can create it, and we are creating together, not Richard or not each of you individually, but together with a lot of people throughout the world today, we are creating the opportunity for a world that works for all. And the universe is moving that way. I believe it with all my heart. And the biggest way is through the internet, through Facebook, through all the ways in which we will communicate with each other today, and especially in the next 20 years, which is going to expand phenomenally. And I think those are opportunities to connect us together so that we feel more like one and less separated. And if we use those tools, we can then fulfill our purpose of not only trying to become one, of being one. We already are one, but we think we're separated. And so we step into this idea of not being separated, and we look at every opportunity to see our brothers and sisters as children of God, as individuals that we are connected to in one spirit. All of us are connected, heart to heart and soul to soul, mind to mind. But until we're willing to say, okay, I've grown enough so I can now take on a purpose that will make a difference, and there are so many of them out there. And what are you called to do becomes a real important thing. And that's your choice. That's your option. And the neat thing is we can have a congregation where a person sits over here and has one idea, and a person over here has a totally different idea of that, how to manage that. And hopefully when we talk about it, there is this agreeing and disagreeing with love. Because we all have different experiences from which we grow. So that's the idea of moving through the 5 principles, and the most important principle is taking action. The first action is spiritual action in your own life. The second is reaching into your community, into your family, and being a demonstration. And the third is reaching out into the world with a word that people don't like, but that is social justice. Okay? Most of you like that word, but a lot of people don't like that word. So anyway, and a lot of people in Unity don't think we ought to be involved in that. But that time is changing, and has moved tremendously over the last 15 years. So what was the next one, Daphne?
All right. How do you forgive people who continuously lie to you?
Who continue what?
Continuously lie to you.
Continuously lie to me? Mm-hmm. We had that question this morning, but they were a little more honest. The question was, how do I handle this thing of my dislike for Donald Trump? Yeah. Okay? And that's basically the same question in a sense, depending on how you look at Donald Trump, okay? So, a lie, many times, is a different perception that that person has that I don't have. So I call it a lie. And sometimes people do lie intentionally. But most times people are talking about what their truth is in the moment, how they have developed. And if I can try to grasp that, understand that, and that's difficult. I admit that. When somebody says something that I know is not the fact, I want to call it a lie. Then all of a sudden what I'm doing is calling the person a liar. Then what happens, I've now separated myself from that person spiritually. So I have some responsibility in not judging. And that's really a tough one, I know. So how do I deal with that? And I would say that it takes a different definition of forgiveness. And I talked about that at 9 o'clock. And that definition is a book by Colin Tipping, which is called Radical Forgiveness. And it's radical because what he says is you do not have to forgive anybody, nor do you have to forgive yourself. You have to see the person in a different light. You have to see the person as one who is helping you, is revealing to you either how you want to be or don't want to be, okay, is helping you grow, and is not an enemy, but actually is a friend. When I was in El Paso, I had a fellow who was the Lucy in my life. I liked him a lot, but he was the Lucy in my life, you know? And I felt like Charlie Brown every time I was around him. And one of the things is that he was on our finance team. And after being on the finance team for a while, the one thing I could depend on him saying at every finance team meeting is, we're going bankrupt. And it got so it irritated me. And so I would nicely fight back a little bit, okay? Really, I became defensive. That's what I became. And those who know me really well know I can do that pretty well sometimes. And so what happened is that I read Colin Tipping's book about radical forgiveness. And so I said, maybe there's another way of looking at this fellow. And we were good friends. We did things together. We were good friends. But when he was in the finance team meeting and I was in the finance team meeting, we forgot we were friends sometimes. And I was uncomfortable with that. And so I wanted to change. So what I did after reading Colin's book is I asked this fellow to come into my office, and we sat and we talked. And I really did. I knew things about him, but I didn't know a lot about him. You know what I mean? He was a friend, kind of, hi, how you doing? And we would go do something together. I have lunch together every once in a while. But I really didn't know much about him. Find out this fellow had 3 restaurants, and all 3 went bankrupt. Now, do you think that has something to do with his perspective on how he saw the church? And because he was saying that, I wasn't listening, nor were others very much, to good points he was making. Things we could change. And after experiencing that with him, I saw him, as Colin said, as my friend, as my teacher. And it was difficult at times. But as I began to see him as my teacher, I lost all that stuff about what I thought he was, who I thought he was. And he became my friend and a teacher to me the minute I changed my mind. That's what forgiveness is really all about. It's beginning to see somebody in a different light and to see them as your teacher, as your friend, rather than as your enemy or as the person who creates creates a sense of non-peace in you. Okay? So I couldn't go to meetings, by the way. And for the last 2 years I was going, he could talk all about bankruptcy, and I just listened to him, say, thank you very much. Now, what do you think the real problem is here? And sometimes he would come up with the answer because he was good with numbers. So it's really seeing the person a different way. The other point on forgiveness, if we're not careful, if I need to forgive Bert here because of something he did, okay? And this man needs forgiveness, okay? Because I see all his flaws. Oh, my. What am I doing? I call that phantom forgiveness. I'm saying, Bert, I forgive you. That makes me feel really good. But I still see Bert as the bad guy, as the guy who is making a mistake. I'm seeing from a sense of separation than a sense of oneness. So I don't need to forgive him. He's done nothing to me except allow me to grow if I look at it in a positive sense. And I do have to forgive myself still, only because I judge somebody else when I try to forgive them, if that makes sense. So forgiveness is very difficult for a lot of people because they're expecting something that forgiveness is not. But if you buy the idea that we are eternal beings, I mean, we didn't come here, born into this world, all of a sudden we started to be eternal beings. We're already eternal beings. And we will continue as eternal beings. And in that idea, in that concept, what happens is that I understand before I got here, I probably had the consciousness to understand what I needed. And I brought into my life those folks so I could become even more than I was. And that's what the human condition is for, to help us grow, to help us realize who we are, and then to allow death to take place, not be afraid of it, but know that we are in eternity in consciousness. And when we believe that, which nobody asks a question about, we become a lot more comfortable with the idea of death. Death is nothing more than a transition. So that's my answer on forgiveness anyway, with death tied in at the end. Any others?
All right. There is no end. No, Daphne just answered it. I'm going to go to the next question. We will not know. Wait a minute. We will not know until we know. So what do we need to learn? What do we need you for? Richard, this is not my question, I promise. Is it trying to learn the lesson creating something?
Is it time to learn what now?
Wait a minute. It says, isn't trying to learn the lesson creating something? Or trying to learn the lesson?
Does somebody want to clarify that, whoever asked the
Jackie?
question? Thank you.
Yeah, I would love to.
Tell me what you're asking me. Thank you, yeah. That's good so the folks at home can hear.
Okay, so we will not know until we know. So reading the spiritual books, going and talking to people and having somebody lead you or call it guiding you, isn't that, to me, that's creating something, trying to create something that's not yet in your moment. And aren't we all just supposed to sort of be until we are?
That's a great question. To be until we are. In the absolute, there's no time. Okay? So I would say that we always are becoming who we are. It's part of the journey. And the moment that we have an aha, a realization that We need to move in a little different direction, think a little different way, open our hearts up and our minds up, is when we are able to have the aha. And when that happens, we buy into it. Now, sometimes we say, nah. But my suggestion would be buy into it and try it out for a little while. And when you do that, then maybe, just maybe, that is the moment. That's when the moment when the aha says, I am a spiritual being having this spiritual experience. And that's all that's important to me. And as I understand that, I step into the uniqueness that I am and the beauty that I am, rather than waiting for it to come because it's already there. Okay? You don't have to wait for it. So thank you. Yeah. Okay, so let's see what time it is. It's that time.